You ever notice how some moments stick with you long after the noise dies down? Tonight's episode was supposed to be simple. A clean temperature check on the NBA. A look back at ratings, revenue, attendance, all of it. But somewhere in the middle of thinking about where the league has been, I started thinking about where we've been, too. Because 2020 didn't just change basketball. It changed all of us. As people, as fans, as communities. And now here we are, December, the month where the world slows down just enough for everything you've been carrying to rise to the surface. It's cold outside. The year is almost over. And suddenly the game feels less like entertainment and more like something human, something grounding. So tonight, yes, we're talking about the NBA's fallout. We're talking about whether the league ever truly recovered from the bubble, from the boycotts, from the George Floyd moment, from a year when everything felt fragile. But this isn't just a numbers episode. Not in December. Not anymore. Because from December 3rd all the way till the first of the year, we're doing things a little differently on this show. Still basketball. Still culture, still truth, but with a little more heart, a little more space, a little more humanity. This is the month where the game and real life start overlapping in ways we don't always talk about. The quiet nights, the memories, the loneliness, the joy, the hope, the heaviness, the healing. So consider tonight the first step into that shift. A temperature check, not just on the league, but on all of us. All right, let's get into it. This is Ball Rants. I'm your host, Vincent Cooper. And tonight we're talking about whether the NBA ever truly recovered and what that says about the rest of us. And as we step into this first December episode, into this month of honesty, perspective, and checking the temperature on where we've been, I want to acknowledge something real. December isn't just a season for the league. It's a season for creators, for grinders, for the people who stay up late shaping stories while the rest of the world is winding down. And that's where Dubby fits perfectly into our identity. Not as a sales pitch, not as a gimmick, but as part of this grind. Part of the reason these late night edits, these early morning uploads, these heart check episodes even get made. Dubby believed in Ball Rants long before anyone should have. And this month, as we bring more humanity, more heart, and more reflection to the show, I want to carry that partnership with the same intention. To everyone listening on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you are, make sure you're subscribed. And if anything in these December episodes resonates with you, drop a rating, leave a review, hit like, or call in at 216-452-8813 and share what's on your mind. All right. When we talk about the NBA changing, there's always this temptation to point to moments, to say, oh, it was the bubble, or it was COVID, or it was the protest. But the truth is, 2020 wasn't one moment. It was an avalanche. A year where every foundation we thought we could trust, sports, society, routine, rhythm, they cracked, and all at once. And the league felt that tremor deeper than most. On the court, everything familiar disappeared. A season was paused, a schedule torn apart, a playoff bracket relocated into a sealed-off world in Orlando, where the air was still and the silence was loud enough to hear every sneaker squeak. And painted right there on the floor, Black Lives Matter. Players added social messages to their jerseys. Coaches and athletes knelt together in unified protest. Games stopped again in late August when the Milwaukee Bucks refused to take the court after Jacob Blake was shot in Kenosha. A league-wide pause. A global spotlight. a sports world brought to a halt by human pain. And whether fans agreed with the messaging, disagreed with the timing, or just didn't have the emotional bandwidth for any of it, the result was all the same. Basketball stopped being background noise. It became a cultural pressure point, a shock to the system. And in the middle of all that, the product itself was fundamentally altered. Neutral site games, empty stands, crowd noise pumped in like a simulation. A finals matchup, LeBron versus Miami. That should have been a ratings juggernaut. Instead, pulling some of the lowest numbers in league history. Not because fans didn't care, but because the world was exhausted. And this is where the December tone matters. Because here in 2025, 5 years removed from all that chaos, we're finally at a place where we can look back with clear eyes. We're far enough away to measure the fallout, but close enough to still feel its weight. The NBA wasn't just navigating a pandemic. It was navigating grief, division, exhaustion, the loss of normal life, the loss of emotional bandwidth, the loss of routine, something sports depend on more than any other form of entertainment. And whether we call it a ratings dip, a cultural shift, or simply a broken rhythm, there was a moment, a real one, where fans drifted. Not because they stopped caring about basketball, but because they were trying to survive. So when we talk about the 2020 fallout, we're not just talking about numbers. We're talking about a league that had to carry the emotional weight of a country in crisis, and an audience that had to decide how much they could carry with them. Tonight, as we move deeper into this December arc, that's why this segment matters. Because before we talk ratings, attendance, revenue, we have to acknowledge the shock, the fracture, the moment where the NBA and its fans stood in the same storm, soaked to the bone, trying to figure out what comes next. Before we jump into the next segment, I want to take a moment to welcome all of our iTunes listeners who are joining the Ball Rants family this month. This December shift isn't just for longtime listeners. It's for you, too. For anyone finding this show for the first time, for anyone returning after a break, for anyone looking for a place where basketball and humanity can breathe in the same space. So if you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you get your basketball fix, do me one quick favor. Make sure you're subscribed. It helps more than you know. And if this episode or any episode this month resonates with you, drop a rating, leave a review, hit like, share it with a friend, or call in at 216-452-8813 and tell me what's on your mind. Ball Rants is growing across all platforms, and you're a part of that growth. This show is better with you in the room. All right, let's keep going. We talked about the shock, and we talked about the fracture. Now let's look at what the numbers say about the rebuild. When you look back at those years, the bubble, the silence, the protests, and the uncertainty, the numbers don't just tell you what happened to the league. They tell you what happened to us. Because ratings, attendance, revenue, they're not just business metrics. Not really. They're emotional barometers. They're reflections of hope, exhaustion, fear, and recovery. And the slow, messy human process of feeling connected to something again. So let's walk through these numbers, not as analysts, not as executives, but as people who lived through every one of these moments. Before the world cracked open, NBA ratings were steady, healthy, predictable. Then comes 2020 and suddenly the numbers fall off a cliff. People loved basketball just as much, but love wasn't the problem. The problem was emotional bandwidth. People weren't tuning out the NBA, they were tuning into survival, worrying about their families, losing loved ones, losing jobs, staring at ceilings at 3 a.m, carrying grief they didn't know how to name. Basketball didn't stop mattering. people just ran out of space to enjoy anything. And in that context, those historically low finals numbers, they aren't a failure. They're a snapshot of a world in pain. But then look what happens next. As healing slowly begins, as life reopens, as people let themselves breathe again, ratings start climbing, then climbing more. And then this season, the best opening month in 15 years. Why? Because joy comes back in waves. Not all at once, not predictably. But when people feel safe enough to let joy in, they come back to the things that remind them of who they were before the storm. Basketball is one of those things. If ratings measure the casual heart, attendance measures the devoted one. And nothing captures the emotional story of 2020 better than this. In 2020 and 21, the NBA averaged 893 fans per game. That's not a typo. Not because people didn't want to attend, but because they couldn't. Empty arenas, empty rituals, empty moments where community used to live. Those silent seats, they weren't just lost ticket sales. They were a reflection of the loneliness so many people felt that year. But when arenas reopened, my God. Fans came back like they were running toward a light. 18,077 per game in 21 and 22. In 23 and 24, 18,324 fans per game. Sellouts everywhere. New records every season. Because showing up in person wasn't just entertainment. It was part of healing. It was hearing real noise again. Feeling energy again. Being surrounded by people again. Remembering what it felt like to belong to something bigger than your own thoughts. Attendance didn't rebound because of marketing. It rebounded because people finally had a place to put their joy again. Revenue tells the story the slowest, but it tells it the loudest. Pre-pandemic, the NBA was approaching $9 billion a year. Then COVID slams it down to $6.4 billion, a massive loss. But look at the comeback. A $76 billion media deal, over $10 billion in annual revenue, new global partnerships, expanded digital presence, a stronger league than before the storm. This isn't a financial story, it's a resilience story. This is what it looks like when a league and its fans get knocked down together and then slowly, painfully, but beautifully stand back up together. Revenue is not money. Revenue is renewal. Revenue is proof that connection comes back. Hope comes back. Community comes back. Human beings always, always, always find their way home. So what do the numbers really mean? They mean the NBA didn't just survive a crisis. It survived our crisis. Our loneliness, our exhaustion, our fear, our grief, our year of feeling disconnected, even from ourselves. Because when life fell apart, the relationship between the league and the fans, it didn't just break, it paused. And when the world slowly opened again, emotionally, spiritually, physically, people came back to the things that made them feel whole. Basketball didn't bring us through the storm, but it was one of the things waiting for us on the other side when we finally stepped out of it. And that's what December is about this year. Remembering why we needed the game. Remembering why we still do. Remembering that the numbers only matter because the people behind them do. Alright, we've talked about the fallout. We've talked about the rebuild. Now let's talk about what actually changed between the league and the people who watch it. If segment 1 was the fracture, and segment 2 was the measurement of the healing, then segment 3 is the truth a lot of fans don't want to say out loud. We didn't come out of 2020 the same people we went in as, and neither did the league. Something in the relationship changed. Not broken, not ruined, just different. And the more you look at these past few seasons, the more you realize the NBA wasn't just rebuilding ratings or revenue, it was trying to rebuild connection. Let's talk about what shifted. For decades, basketball was where people went to forget the world, to tune out, to catch their breath. But in 2020, the NBA didn't let you forget the world. It held the world up like a mirror and said, "Look with us." For some fans, that was powerful. For others, that was painful. For many, it was simply too much, at a time when everything was already too much. And this is the part people don't talk about. Some fans didn't step away because the messaging bothered them. They stepped away because the world was bleeding. And suddenly the one place they used for comfort was bleeding too. And when that happens, it changes the emotional contract. For better or worse, the league and its fans got closer that year. Close enough to see each other's wounds. And once you see someone's pain, or your own pain reflected back at you, you don't go back to a shallow relationship. Everything gets deeper, sometimes heavier, but always different. The other shift came quietly, almost invisibly. People stopped watching basketball the way they used to, not just because of the pandemic, because the world changed the way it consumes everything. Games became clips, highlights became timelines, players became brands, and teams became background noise behind storylines. There's nothing wrong with that. It's evolution. But it means the emotional center of the NBA moved from the arena to the phone, from communal to individual, from experience to quick hits, and from ritual to convenience. It's not that the people care less, it's that they care differently. And that shift, that new distance between the league and the traditional way that fans used to engage, is one of the biggest aftershocks of 2020. Because once you break a rhythm, even unintentionally, it takes time to feel connected the same way again. Before the fracture, the NBA had clean, simple storylines. LeBron versus the Warriors, KD is the villain, Giannis was on the rise, Russ and Harden were rewriting stat books. Then everything changed. Players moved. Stars aged. Super teams imploded. New faces rose too fast for the world to recognize them. Injuries derailed half the arcs that we expected. Parity exploded. That's great for competition, confusing for casuals. The league went from a blockbuster movie to a character drama. Not bad, just different. And here's the emotional truth. Sometimes people struggle with messy stories because they remind them of their own. In some ways, the NBA got more human, less predictable, less polished, more vulnerable. And that's a harder story to follow if all you want is a clean, easy storyline to get lost in. But it's also a more beautiful story. The kind with room for surprise, growth, redemption, heartbreak, and joy. A story that feels like life. And this is the heart of segment 3. Trust. Trust in the league. Trust in stars. Trust in the schedules. Trust that the season would finish. Trust that a team wouldn't flip its roster 3 times in a year. Trust that the NBA would feel stable again. People underestimate how emotional trust is in sports. We don't just watch, we invest time, hope, energy, identity, money, childhood memories, family traditions. And 2020 shook that investment, not intentionally, not maliciously, but undeniably. And what you're seeing now in the attendance, in the rising ratings, in the new wave of stars, is not just business recovery. It's the slow rebuilding of emotional trust between fans and the league. A trust that says, we lived through something together, and we're still here. So what changed in the relationship? Everything and nothing. The love is still there. The passion is still there. The highs, the lows, the community, all still there. But the innocence is gone. The simplicity is gone. The guarantee that sports are separate from life is gone. What replaced it is something deeper. A league and a fan base that went through a crisis together and came out more honest, more human, more reflective. Not as an escape, but as a reminder of connection. Not as a distraction, but as a reflection. And not as a break from life, but as proof that life keeps going. And that leads us into segment 4. Because now that we know what broke, what healed, and what changed, we have to talk about what still feels off and what still needs time. If segment 3 was about what changed, segment 4 is about what never fully healed. Because healing doesn't happen in a straight line. Not for people, not for communities, not for leagues. And even with the ratings up, attendance being record-breaking, revenue soaring, there are still pieces of the NBA's soul and the fan base's heart that need and still feel tender. Let's talk about them. Honest, direct, human. 2020 didn't split fans because of one issue. It split them because everyone was going through something personal. And sports suddenly became a proxy for those emotions. For some fans, the protests were overdue and powerful. For others, they were overwhelming. For many, they reopened wounds they didn't know they had. And even though the slogans are gone from the jerseys, and Black Lives Matter is no longer printed on the court, the memory of that moment is still alive. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. In the way people talk about the league, in the way debates escalate, in the way distrust flickers in the background of certain conversations. It's not anger, it's not division, it's unresolved emotion, a quiet ache. And let's be honest, the NBA didn't lose hardcore fans. It lost casuals, not because they cared less, but because their routine broke. Sports are rhythm. When rhythm breaks, it doesn't always come back. Some fans moved on to other sports. Some moved on to other priorities. Some simply just lost the emotional margin to follow storylines again. And that absence is still felt, not in the numbers, but in the energy. A wound that heals slowly, if at all. The NBA is healthier, competitively, than ever, but emotionally, the pace is harder. Stars move more, teams flip faster, narratives disappear overnight. Dynasties don't last long enough to anchor people. It's not betrayal, it's not chaos, it's whiplash. And fans, especially older ones, feel it. The league isn't doing anything wrong. It's evolving. But evolution always leaves someone a step behind. That gap, that discomfort, that I'm trying to keep up but it feels different now, that's a hurt the league doesn't talk about. but fans feel every day. Fans trust the function of the NBA again, the schedule, the structure, the competition. But the deeper trust, the emotional trust, it's still finding its footing. And it's not the league's fault, and it's definitely not the fans' fault. It's just what happens when two sides weather a storm together. Rebuilding trust is quiet, slow, gradual. And this season, with packed arenas, rising ratings, and a new generation of stars, it feels like the first year where both sides can finally admit we made it through, but we're still healing. So what still hurts? Not the league, not the game, not the players, the relationship. The emotional contract between fans and the NBA went through something real. And even now there are tender places. Places that sting, places that ache, places that remind us what we lived through. And that's why this December arc matters. Not to relive pain, not to reopen wounds, but to acknowledge them so that we can move into a new year with clarity, warmth, and connection. And that brings us to the bounce. Because after all this reflection, all this honesty, all this looking at where the league and its fans stand, we need to end on something hopeful, something human, something that reminds us that healing isn't linear, but it is possible. The bounce is next. Before we close tonight, I want to take a breath with you. We just walked through something heavy, not just the NBA's story over the past 5 years, but the story of what it means to be a person in a world that doesn't always make sense. Tonight wasn't about numbers. It wasn't even really about basketball. It was about the parts of us that got shaken in 2020, the parts we pretend are fine, the parts we tried to outrun, the parts we haven't fully healed from yet. And since it's December, a month built on memories, emotions, and all the complicated feelings that come with the end of a year, I want to honor something. You made it here. You're listening. You're still standing. That matters. Whether this year was good to you, hard on you, or somewhere in between, you're here. And maybe, just maybe, this show gives you a place to breathe when the world feels loud. A place to feel connected when everything feels scattered. A place to hear truth when everything else feels like noise. That's the mission this month. From now until January 1st, every episode is going to hold space for the humanity behind the game. The loneliness, the hope, the exhaustion, the reflection, the joy, the pressure, and the progress. Because basketball isn't just a sport. It's a companion. It's a rhythm. It's something that reminds us in the quiet moments that we're not just moving through this life alone. And speaking of not being alone, you already know what I'm about to say. Dubby. The world sees them as an energy drink, but I see them as one of the first partners who believed in this show when they didn't have to. In a year where trust and connection are fragile, they chose to stand with the creator building something from absolutely nothing. That's why I talk about them. Not for numbers, not for sales. I use the product. It's amazing. But because loyalty matters. Partnership matters. Showing up for the people who show up for you, that matters. So, if you're grinding through December, if you're chasing goals, fighting fatigue, or trying to stay committed when everything else feels heavy, Dubby's been a part of my fuel, and I'm proud to say that out loud. If you want to try it, hit dubby.gg and use my code Ball Rants. Not because you owe me anything, but because supporting this partnership supports a vision. And lastly, before we wrap, I want you to know something. Whatever you carried into December, you don't carry that alone. If you're struggling, if you're celebrating, if you're processing something you haven't said out loud yet, give me a call. 216-452-8813. Share your story. Share your truth. Share your heart. This month, Round Ball Rants isn't just a basketball show. It's a community. And communities grow when people are brave enough to show up for one another. So here's my promise. I'll show up for you. You show up for yourself. And together, we'll finish this year with purpose. I'm Vincent Cooper. This was Round Ball Rants. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, it's not just basketball. It's therapy with a bounce.